Few names in ancient history evoke as much power and influence as Nebuchadnezzar. Ruling Babylon from 605 before Christ to 562 before Christ, he was one of the most formidable kings of the Near East, consolidating his empire as one of the most important powers of antiquity. His name resonates in political and military history, as well as in monumental architecture and in biblical accounts, where he is portrayed as an imposing king and at times as an instrument of God himself. Nebuchadnezzar's reign was a milestone in Babylon's rise to the status of the greatest empire of its time. Son of Nabopolassar, founder of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, he consolidated his father's conquests and further expanded its borders. His victory over the Egyptians and Assyrians at the Battle of Carchemish in 605 before Christ secured Babylonian dominion over Mesopotamia and the Levant. Among his most notable military actions was the conquest of Jerusalem, which resulted in the destruction of Solomon's temple and the exile of the Jews to Babylon, an event that would have profound consequences for history and tradition. In addition to his political and military influence, Nebuchadnezzar was an architectural visionary. His reign was marked by an ambitious building program that transformed the city of Babylon into a true symbol of power and splendor. Among his most impressive achievements is the protection of the city with gigantic walls, luxurious palaces, and the magnificent Ishtar Gate, one of the most imposing entrances to the city. In the 7th century before Christ, Mesopotamia was dominated by the Assyrian Empire, one of the most brutal and militarily advanced powers of the time. Before we continue with this video, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, leave your like, activate the notification bell, and click on all. Also click on the thank you to help us create more biblical stories like this one. The Assyrians controlled vast territories, including Babylon, imposing their authority with ruthless military campaigns and a policy of terror. However, their empire began to weaken due to internal conflicts and the resistance of subjugated peoples. Taking advantage of this scenario of instability, Nabopolassar, a Babylonian general, led a revolt against the Assyrians in 626 before Christ and distributed the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The rise of Babylon as a new power was consolidated with the destruction of Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, in 612 before Christ, a feat made possible by Nabopolassar's alliance with the Medes and the cities. This event marked the end of Assyrian rule and paved the way for Babylon to take control of Mesopotamia. Nebuchadnezzar, Nabopolassar's eldest son, grew up in this context of war and Babylonian rise. From a young age, he demonstrated remarkable military skills, being trained to lead armies and consolidate his father's empire. His greatest test came in 605 before Christ, when he commanded the Babylonian troops at the Battle of Carchemish. Shortly after this victory, Nabopolassar died, and Nebuchadnezzar returned to Babylon to be crowned king. He thus assumed the throne with great prestige, determined to expand the empire and transform Babylon into the most powerful city of antiquity. Nebuchadnezzar was one of the greatest conquerors of antiquity, significantly expanding the Babylonian Empire through strategic and relentless military campaigns. After his decisive victory over the Egyptians at the Battle of Carchemish, 605 before Christ, he consolidated Babylon's supremacy over Mesopotamia and the Levant region. In the following years, he launched military campaigns against cities and kingdoms that threatened his hegemony, ensuring that Babylon became the largest empire of its time. One of his most notable campaigns was against the kingdom of Judah. In 597 before Christ, Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem and captured the king. In addition to his campaign against Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar also faced military challenges in other regions. He waged a long and difficult campaign against the Phoenician city of Tyre. Another important achievement was the subjugation of Damascus and other Persian territories. With these victories, Nebuchadnezzar not only consolidated Babylonian rule over Mesopotamia and neighboring territories, but also strengthened his empire economically and culturally. His military exploits ensured that Babylon remained the dominant power in the Near East until the rise of the Persian Empire decades later. His legacy as a conqueror and military strategist is remembered to this day, both in historical records and in biblical narratives. Under Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Babylon became the most splendid and advanced city in the ancient world. His rule was marked not only by military conquests, but also by an ambitious project of urbanization and advanced development. The king invested heavily in the protection of the capital, expanding its walls, designing grand temples, and strengthening its infrastructure, making Babylon a true symbol of power and sophistication. His rule was marked not only by military conquests, but also by an ambitious project of urbanization and advanced development. The king invested heavily in the protection of the capital, expanding its walls, designing grand temples, and strengthening its infrastructure, making Babylon a true symbol of power and sophistication. One of Nebuchadnezzar's greatest achievements was the construction of the imposing walls of Babylon. They were one of the most impressive defensive structures of antiquity. Designed to protect the city against invasions and demonstrate the power of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, they stood out for their colossal height and extraordinary thickness. Standing about 25 meters high, the equivalent of an 8-story building, the walls dominated the landscape and offered an almost insurmountable barrier against enemies. Their thickness varied between 7 and 18 meters, allowing 2 chariots to travel side by side on them. This not only reinforced their resistance, but also facilitated the transport of troops and equipment within the structure itself, ensuring an efficient defensive system. The walls were built with oxidized clay bricks, a resistant material, and reinforced with strategically positioned watchtowers. In addition to the monumental constructions, Nebuchadnezzar's reign was marked by great cultural and technological advances. He restored temples dedicated to the Babylonian gods, especially the main one, Marduk. King Nebuchadnezzar was not only a great conqueror and builder, but also a central character in one of the most enigmatic stories in the Bible. His reign was marked by a prophetic episode that preceded the succession of empires and his own temporary fall due to arrogance. Nebuchadnezzar's dream, described in the book of Daniel, chapter 2, is a biblical narrative that reveals a prophetic vision about the future of world empires. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had a disturbing dream that no wise man or magician in the kingdom could interpret. He saw a great statue with parts made of different materials. Its head was of gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet were a mixture of iron and clay. Then a stone, cut without the help of human hands, struck the feet of the statue, destroying it completely, and the stone turned into a great mountain that filled the entire earth. Daniel, a young Hebrew gifted with divine wisdom, was called to interpret the dream. He explained that the statue represented 4 successive kingdoms, beginning with the Babylonian Empire, head of gold, followed by a lesser kingdom, chest and arms of silver, then a 3rd kingdom, belly and thighs of bronze, and finally a 4th kingdom strong as iron, legs of iron, but with fragile feet of iron and clay, symbolizing division and weakness. The stone that destroyed the statue represents the eternal kingdom of God through Jesus Christ, which will be established at the end of time, replacing all human kingdoms. This dream is interpreted as a prophecy about the succession of world empires and divine sovereignty over history. The central message is that despite the power and glory of human kingdoms, only God's kingdom is eternal and indestructible. After spending 7 years away from power, living like an animal and suffering the consequences of his arrogance, Nebuchadnezzar finally regained his sanity. This event, recorded in the book of Daniel, chapter 4, shows a king who, after his humiliating experience, recognizes God's sovereignty and begins to rule with greater humility. Upon resuming the throne, Nebuchadnezzar was no longer the same authoritarian leader he had been before. Earthly greatness. Although he was still a firm and decisive ruler, his approach became more reflective. He spent his final years consolidating his empire, ensuring that his conquests were maintained, and reinforcing his capital, Babylon, as the political and economic center of the ancient world. Even with this change in stance, Nebuchadnezzar remained a shrewd monarch and managed the empire with great skill. He maintained internal order and avoided major revolts, leaving Babylon at its peak. Under his rule, it was a prosperous city like never before, renowned for its advanced architecture, fortifications, and cultural and religious development. The legacy of Nebuchadnezzar, one of the most famous Babylonian monarchs, transcended his time and continues to influence archaeology, theology, literature, and popular culture. His reign, marked by military conquests, grandiose constructions, and efficient administration, left an indelible mark on the history of Mesopotamia and the collective imagination. Nebuchadnezzar occupies a prominent place in the Bible, especially in the book of Daniel. His figure is associated with dramatic events such as the dream of the great image, Daniel 2, the fiery furnace, Daniel 3, and his humiliation and restoration, Daniel 4. These narratives highlight theological themes such as God's sovereignty over human kingdoms, divine judgment against arrogance, and the possibility of redemption. The story of Nebuchadnezzar serves as an example of how even the most powerful rulers are subject to divine will. His eventual conversion, after recognizing God's power, is often cited as an example of humility and faith. Nebuchadnezzar was a competent administrator who consolidated the Neo-Babylonian Empire after the conquests of his father, Nabopolassar. He implemented reforms that strengthened the empire's economy and infrastructure, ensuring its stability for decades. His buildings not only beautified Babylon, but also served as symbols of power and unity. The Ishtar Gate, for example, was a monumental entrance decorated with glazed bricks and images of dragons and bulls, representing divine protection and the strength of the empire. Nebuchadnezzar was one of the most powerful and influential monarchs of antiquity. In addition to his conquests, Nebuchadnezzar transformed Babylon into one of the most splendid cities in history. The story of Nebuchadnezzar teaches us that power, when not balanced with humility, can lead to downfall. He was a ruthless and visionary ruler, but his arrogance caused him to temporarily lose his sanity. Only when he discovered that his power was not absolute, but granted by something greater, was he able to reclaim his throne and rule with a new understanding. Even after millennia, Nebuchadnezzar's name remains immortal in the historical records. His impact can be seen in archaeology, biblical texts, and modern cultural references. His reign marked a period of splendor for Babylon, and his story serves as a reminder of the ephemerality of human power.